reaffirm and strengthen cooperation on the free and open Indo-Pacific. Let's bring in Dr. Satoru Nagao, non-resident fellow at Hudson Institute. Thanks for joining us this evening.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
How important is the free and open Indo-Pacific to G7 countries?
Free and open Indo-Pacific is, of course, how to maintain international order, etc., on surface. But at the same time, the background of the free and open Indo-Pacific is how to deal with China's threat. China is rising, but this rising is not peaceful. China said this is peaceful, but countries around China do not think so. China tried to excluding any Southeast Asian countries' involvement in the South China Sea. Why? Along with China's rise, China is provoking countries around China against Philippines, against Vietnam, against Japan, against India, against etc., etc., etc. That is the reason that this word is very important. Free and open Indo-Pacific originally came from the Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's Japan's idea. China's provocation is based on the rising power of China. China's attitude is based on overestimation of China. So that's why the more China rises, the more provocation will be escalated. So under such kind of situation, what should we do? According to the data of the SIPRI, the think tank of Sweden, the database clearly indicates that 2012 to 2021, that is 1 decade, China increased their military expenditure 72%. During the same period, the United States decreased 6%, increased 76% versus 72% versus decreased 6%. That is the current situation. So even if US military expenditure is 2.7 times higher than China's, China is catching up. And this changing military balance is one of the reasons of the China's provocation. What happened in the South China Sea indicate that when military balance has changed, China takes the territory. China is safe to steal territory, it looks like. Because when France withdrew from Vietnam, Indochina Peninsula in this case, China took the half of the Paracel Island. And when the Americans withdrew from Vietnam after the Vietnam War, China took another half of the Paracel Island. In 1980s, when the Soviet troops reduced the number, China took the sixth feature of the Spratly Island. And in 1990s, when the Americans withdrew from Philippines, China took the Mischief Reef. So when military balance has changed and the power vacuum has happened, they try to steal it. If so, recent provocation, how to deal with China? Maintaining military balance is needed, but budget. China increased 72%, the US decreased 6%. What should I do? That's why free and open Indo-Pacific. Free and open Indo-Pacific came from the idea of the Indo-Pacific, which is the idea including all of the territorial issue of China is included. Japan, India, Southeast Asia countries, all of these countries who are under the threat of China is included if we say Indo-Pacific. Compare with Asia-Pacific, Indo-Pacific is useful. And free and open is more ideological base. Free is a public space like South China Sea. Free is needed. But China tried to exclude. South China Sea is own sea, they said. 90% of the South China Sea, they are claiming their own sea and excluding any military asset inside because China say this is China's sea. But view from the country around China. This is free area. Open is also important. Open, we share as the international order, but China tried to exclude. China tried to close. So that's why free and open Indo-Pacific. Now G7 is not the country in the Indo-Pacific except Japan, but G7 start focusing on the Indo-Pacific, especially free and open Indo-Pacific. Why? Because Japan's persuasion has succeeded. US persuasion, Japan's persuasion, of course, Australia's persuasion, India's persuasion, the regional country succeed to persuade European countries. That's why G7 focusing on the free and open Indo-Pacific. So they start to understand how important free and open, and they start to understand how important the rising China as a threat. That is the reason G7 start focusing on. So this is very important. So NATO will open their office in Tokyo. This is just under negotiation, so not decided yet, but there is a possibility to happen. Why? European countries start to understand how important free and open Indo-Pacific as their interest. So that's why they will come and they will open office. They will intervene the situation. If the China try to attack Taiwan, such kind of situation has happened. Not only Japan, not only the Philippines, not only the United States, not only the Australia, European countries will involve too. If the G7 talk about this, free and open Indo-Pacific. For example, British aircraft carrier visited the Indo-Pacific country, many Indo-Pacific countries. Why? They visited many countries, call at the port. They are checking the capability of the port. This is the preparation to deploy aircraft carrier. France nuclear submarines coming to the South China Sea, and the French frigate is crossing the Taiwan Strait. Why? They are checking and collecting information to deploy their military forces. Reciprocal agreement has agreed between Japan and Australia and Japan and British. British is the country to deploy military force. In Japan, that's why reciprocal agreement is needed. When the British soldier come to Japan and stay in Japan, in this case, what kind of status they have? If, for example, when they drive the car and accident has happened, in this case, what kind of rule apply to this accident? Japan's soil? Of course, Japan as a sovereign country, Japan has our own rule. But they are foreign troops. So status is matter. Reciprocal agreement can solve this issue. But this means that Japan expects the British will deploy the military force to Japan. So now European countries like British has the interest of the free and open Indo-Pacific. And if I add one more thing, we can imagine, we can compare the Russia and China. Russia, the economy is weak, but Russia military force is relatively strong, at least they believe. So they can start a war, but they cannot continue the war so much because their economy is weak. China is completely opposite. China's military power is growing. Yes, China gets a big military power, but at the same time, when we check the past records, still, China hasn't committed successful military operation in the past. So China's military power, on surface, they are very strong, but indeed, they haven't the successful record. But their economy is very strong. China's economy is very strong. Now they are catching up the US in this case. So in the long run, Russia is a short-term threat, but China can be the long-term threat. That's why free and open Indo-Pacific is needed to deal with China because this is a strategy in the long run. That's why G7 focusing on the free and open Indo-Pacific is a welcome move and a natural move. Thank you.
You mentioned earlier that there is a potential NATO office that may be established in Tokyo. How pivotal will a NATO office in Tokyo pushes against the closure of the potential Indo-Pacific region?
What kind of office they will open is related with what kind of interest. But at least one thing I can mention, if they open the office as a regular work, they can collect information and exchange opinion with other officials and create a connection to prepare the joint operation with Japan and regional countries. So opening office is one of the steps to expanding influence in the NATO's decision making. The Asia's information will come to the headquarters of NATO, and many people in the NATO headquarters can access it because of the office. It looks like the image is a little looks like the embassy. Because embassy is located, embassy staff is there, and they can exchange opinion, and they can collect information, and they can create a human-human connection. That's why if they need to use this connection, for example, the military operation, it will smooth, or they can identify the needs regular basis. So opening office is just one step, but very important step. That is the reason opening office is important. Thank you.
With the strong stand of the G7 to the Indo-Pacific region, what can we look forward in the days to come?
Since Russia's aggression in Ukraine has started, the United Nations Security Council hasn't worked so well. But instead of this, the multinational framework like G7 or some others, Quad or others, working very well because they are same side. So instead of the United Nations, now G7's influence is expanding. So G7's decision making impact with the G7 decision will affect, will spread the many countries in the world. So that's why the G7 decision towards the Indo-Pacific is also important. Not only towards the situation in Ukraine, but also the G7 decision toward the Indo-Pacific will show the big impact as a leading multinational framework. And in this case, G7 is a group of influential countries. In 1980s, more influential. The combine of their GDP is 60% of the world GDP, but now nearly 40%. So compared with the 1980s, their influence is declining. But at the same time, since Russia's aggression to Ukraine, they collaborate each other very well, very deeply, exchanging the opinion, and decision is coordinated by the 7 countries. That is the reason, even if the 40% will act as one integrated power. That's why G7's decision toward Indo-Pacific is still influential. And G7, last sometimes of the G7 summit, and try to include some selected country of the other regions. This year, from ASEAN, Vietnam, Indonesia will join, and India will join, Comoro will join, indeed Brazil will join. Comoro is representative of the AU, and from the South Pacific there is one, and India is G20's presidency. Vietnam, Indonesia is, of course, Indonesia was ASEAN's chairman this year. And indeed, Japan focusing on Vietnam and Indonesia very much too. So in total, each country we invited by Japan as a guest country. But the last 3 times, British was the chairman 2 years ago. Germany was the chairman as last year. So every time they choose a guest country and talk about some issue related with them. So that's why this year, the G7 tried to talk about the Global South. Global South, including many regions. So there are many sessions. Last month, there was a 40-minute meeting of G7. They set up many sessions, Latin American sessions, Central Asia and Afghanistan sessions, Middle East sessions, Indo-Pacific sessions, Ukraine sessions, or something like that. So now G7 is talking about what kind of the world order, what kind of the regional issue G7 try to support or help or cooperate. So now G7 is very global power because they try to do that. And at the same time, because of the influence of the G7 is declining compared with the past, G7 collaborate regional countries to solve the problem together, not from up to down. That is not true. G7 try to collaborate regional country. That's why guest countries is also very important, and the guest country is leading country of each region. That is the current situation. Thank you.
Dr. Satoru Nagao, and resident fellow at the Hudson Institute, thank you.
Thank you very much.
This is Reyron and Rosario. That's the Global Affairs Insider. Follow us to our next episode only here in IPDCI News Channel.